where you are at right now is not the same as where you were at before and where you'll be going. And so I think it's good to try to be self-aware about what's important to you and also what's important to your spouse or your partner that you're living with, because it's not just about what you want, but it's what you want for the whole family and for each other.
T-minus 10 seconds.
Welcome to the Journey to Launch podcast with your host, Jamila Souffrant. As a money expert who walks her talk, she helps brave journeyers like you get out of debt, save, invest, and build real wealth. Join her on the journey to launch to financial freedom in
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
If you want the episode show notes for this episode, go to journeytolaunch.com or click the description of wherever you're listening to this episode. In the show notes, you'll get the transcribed version of the conversation, the links that we mentioned, and so much more. Also, whether you are an OG journeyer or brand new to the podcast, I've created a free jumpstart guide to help you on your financial freedom journey. It includes the top episodes to listen to, stages to go through to reach financial freedom, resources, and so much more. You can go to journeytolaunch.com/jumpstart to get your guide right now. Okay, let's hop into the episode. Hey, journeyers. Welcome to the Journey to Launch podcast. I am bringing to you a conversation that I was really excited to have today. I was really looking forward to it actually at the gym this morning. And that is because I have Esther Hyun on the podcast. Esther is a young mom, a stage 4 colorectal cancer survivor, president and board member of Colon Cancer Stars, and lawyer. She is the daughter of immigrants, the first person in her family to go to college and law school, and has been on the journey to financial independence for a little time now. We'll get into her story. And Esther and I, just to give you guys a background, why I was so excited to talk to Esther is because Esther reached out to me. She DM'd me on Instagram and just basically shared her a bit of her story, that she listened to the podcast and that she was a colon cancer survivor, and about just how listening to the podcast and getting her finances together helped her when she had to go through what she went through with cancer, what she is going through. And I was so touched. It wasn't even like you wanted to come on the podcast. You were just sharing it with me. And I remember thinking about it and sitting with it for a bit. And it just reminded me about this work that I'm doing. Because sometimes it can feel, I always say this, I'm just talking into the void. And are people out there? Is this helping? And I know it is. But when I get messages like that of real people, it brings me back to the root of why I'm doing this. And so I was like, you know what, Esther, come on the show. And you were all game, because I think you can share a lot and help a lot of people right now about preparing for what we don't even know is coming in our lives, and about just the financial independence journey. So I'm really excited, Esther, to have you on. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. This is such a full circle moment for me, because I started listening to your podcast essentially when I started my financial independence journey, which was back in 2018. And I know when I messaged you, I shared a little bit of my story, which the reason why I loved your show so much is because I connected with you. A lot of things that you mentioned, I kind of was going through. So I was pregnant with my first kid. I was commuting over an hour, I think it was over 70 miles each way to my job. And I know you had that similar experience where you were, commuting long distance and questioning life, right? And now I'm here speaking with you. So this is so amazing to be here and share my story. And hopefully I'll be able to help someone who's going through something similar as me.
Yes. With that, Esther, so I want to go back a bit. So you said you started listening or start to the podcast, or maybe started your financial independence journey in 2018?
Yes. So I guess I've always been on a financial journey. I just didn't come across financial independence until I came across your podcast. So I started working when I was in high school, sophomore, junior year. When I could legally start working, I started working. I've always been a saver. I opened my first credit card when I had my first job. I've never not paid my credit card in full. So I've always been very responsible with my money. But coming from a background where my parents They didn't go to college. They immigrated here. They did so well for themselves, but they didn't teach me about investing. They just said, spend less than you earn, pay your credit card off in full. But retirement, saving for retirement, that was not a conversation I really had with them. And if anything, I got the perception, not just from that, from other people, that investing was gambling. Because how do you choose what company to select? You don't have a crystal ball, right? And so I've seen people invest in the latest hot stock and then it all goes to zero. And so I'm very logical. The reason why I became a lawyer is because I like to mitigate my risk as much as possible. And so I didn't know what to do with my money. I knew you should invest and I knew about compound interest, but I'm like, what do I invest in? And so when I discovered you and the financial independence movement and about index funds, I feel like that really just was the catalyst to my future and my hopefully soon retirement.
Yeah. Well, what you're describing is what I also say in my book, Your Journey to Financial Freedom, the before awareness of financial independence, because a lot of us are on the journey, whether we know it or not just a life journey, but just like a financial journey. Your finances fuel the life you live. And so you can either be, not aware of financial independence like we were at some point and then say, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And how can I get on board? And luckily, some of the things and foundations you had in place kind of put you at maybe a further along starting point than some people who weren't maybe on top of their debt or savings. And so in that area, I find that people who have that kind of strong foundational saving and or parents who taught them just that mindset, even though investing wasn't a part of it, kind of start just a little bit ahead than maybe some people who didn't just have that foundation. So with that, 2018, when you did find it, were you in debt? Where were you in your career, in your just personal life in terms of responsibilities when you started to make significant changes to your finances?
Yeah. So I had a mortgage on a home I had purchased before I got married. I had just gotten married that year. And I have student loan debt, like many of us, and many lawyers have very large debt. So right now, I'm actually debt-free except for my student loan. So I don't even have a mortgage because we live in the home my husband purchased before we got married. So I consider that his debt and not mine since I'm not on it. But like I mentioned, I was always a saver. So I didn't have any other debt besides those two. I was putting money into my HSA, my 401k. I wasn't investing in a brokerage account or anything like that. And I hadn't started really contributing to IRAs either. And at that point, I was like, what do I do with my money? I'm putting in it, but what do I do? And I remember one of the episodes that I listened from your podcast was about HSAs and investing in them. And I was like, my mind was blown because I didn't know you can invest your money from the HSA. I was spending it on contacts and reimbursing myself. And I didn't really need to because I had savings. I could pay for my contacts just fine without touching my HSA. But no one told me, oh, you can invest this money that's in your HSA. And then I listened to your episode on that and I was like, what? This goes in tax-free. I could spend it tax-free. It grows tax-free. Oh my gosh, why did no one tell this? And I remember sharing it with one of my coworkers and she's like, oh yeah, I knew that. And I'm like, oh. So it's just amazing how listening to your podcast and just the resources out there, there's just so much information. You just have to go out and look for it.
I love that. So for people who are listening, this is what I call breadcrumbs now, or clicking on hyperlinks where you hear something, you're like, if you don't know what it is, you're like, wait, what is that? And why is she so excited about it? And so you can do some further research, but HSA stands for Health Savings Account. And it's very popular in the FIRE community or just if you are in the personal finance world to capitalize and leverage it as a very powerful investing tool. And so I will link the episode that we specifically had on it in the show notes for HSA so people can kind of learn more about that. But it's a very powerful, not just for your health and saving for health expenses, but also a powerful retirement and investing account. So Esther, you are listening to the podcast, you're doing your research, finding out about all these things and applying them. Love to know, because I think most people do want to know when we especially hear lawyers. I think that like when people hear, oh, lawyer, even though you have a lot of debt, that means you're probably making a lot of money. So doing some of this stuff is easier for you, especially you mentioned husband and you had homes, it seems. So it's kind of like, all right. So it seems like also income wise, and correct me if I'm wrong, you might have been also in a strong footing to start your journey or to move forward. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was privileged enough my parents actually helped pay for my undergraduate degree. And so the only debt I have is from going to law school. Yes, being a lawyer, you have a higher income than most people. And so a lot of things were going well for me. But at the same time, there's so many people with high incomes that just waste it away and don't save anything, right? The more money you make, the more problems, because you buy the nice luxury cars or the bigger house. And that's one of the debates that I've been having with my husband, is because we have two young children. We live in a smaller home, and it's like, do we upgrade? Do we really want to take on the additional debt? Is it worth it to us to, do that? Are we doing it for the right reasons? Is it because society says you need this big house with a picket fence and a backyard? Which, by the way, the first home I bought had no grass in the backyard on purpose, because I was like, I don't want to do any kind of maintenance. I don't want to cut grass. And so the backyard of the home that I purchased, the previous owner had put like brick and all this like nice like landscaping without any grass. So I was so happy. But I think that's just like an everyday struggle that we still have right now as a couple, is like, what do we want to put our resource towards? How aggressive do we want to be, right? Like when we didn't have children, it's easy to save a huge chunk of what we are making. But now that we have children, there's daycare expenses, all these other activities that the children do. And when you're a parent, you want to give everything to your child that you didn't have, right? And so you're fighting this urge of wanting to spend more. And yeah, it's just something I'm still struggling with. And I think it evolves and changes as you grow as a person and as the years pass, because, where you are at right now is not the same as where you were at before and where you'll be going. And so I think it's good to try to be self-aware about what's important to you, and also what's important to your spouse or your partner that you're living with, because it's not just about what you want, but it's what you want for the whole family and for each other.
Yeah. Do you guys live in a high cost of area place or low cost?
Yes. So we live in the greater Seattle area. So definitely high cost. And obviously homes are expensive here. And so that's the other thing, is it worth it to us to not only leave our mortgage, which is the interest rates are amazing, right? I think a lot of people that purchased a few years ago are in the same boat, which is it worth it to have the higher interest rate for the extra room or two? And then in addition, everything else costs a lot too, right? Eating out costs a lot. And I would say that's probably one of our biggest expenses, is eating out. My children are only 4 and 2, and they eat like adults, which is insane. Like my grocery bills are insane. You would think having children, they could share one meal. No, that doesn't happen in my family.
Yeah, well, so I want to go back to talk a bit about just the trade-offs, right? Like the trade-offs that we're thinking about, because I'm in the same situation. I feel like I've been talking about getting a car, and my husband too, right? Like I've said this a lot of times on the podcast, he'd like a nicer car. I mean, I'd like a nicer car, but it's not really a priority. And we're at that stage where it's kind of like, do we get one? And I'm like, but we don't have a car note. We don't have to worry about that. Why put like an additional bill in figuring all that out right now? And so that trade-off comes into play, or the kids our ages. I feel like we're definitely spending a lot more now as they get older on food, going out to eat. And It's that how much more do I want to save and cut back versus give my kids these experiences that change. And who knows, maybe a few years from now, we'll be coming or faced with different choices, right? As they get older and have different desires or needs. But I think this is something a lot of people on the journey go through. And even though we might not have what is the correct answer, I think it's important to give ourselves grace within those times that we are thinking about it. So it's not like, oh, you should feel bad because you want a new house or a new car, but you just thinking about the trade-offs is actually a big deal versus, you know what, I'm just going to fall into my whims and just do whatever without thinking about the consequences or the trade-offs that come with that decision.
Yeah. What I realize is financial independence is a lot like trying to lose weight, right? Theoretically, it's very simple. You eat less, burn more calories, you spend less, you earn more money. But there's so much that goes into money and losing weight, right? It's emotional. You think it's logical, but it's more than that. There's so many aspects of your life that affect your decisions when it comes to money and your health. And for me, one of the things I realized is you need to find what works best for you. And I think that's why there's so many health gurus out there about the latest diet and things like that, is because people are trying to find the solution for them. And I think that's the same thing with financial health, is that you need to find what works for you. Some people, it's having very clear-cut rules about like, do not spend on this, do not spend on that, have a budget. Some people go very extreme and they're frugal and cut out everything, right? They make their own bread at home, which no judgment. I make my own sourdough at home. And there's others who do the other end of the spectrum, right? They just spend as much as they make, maybe sometimes more, because they're like, you only live once. You know, I want to enjoy the money that I'm making. And so I think to everyone, it's each their own, and they have to find what they're comfortable with. Maybe in the long term, they may regret it. Maybe they won't. But I'm all about just finding what's best for you. And it's not going to be the same for everyone, even though theoretically we all know how to save money and things like that. There's just so many aspects of our life that contribute to that decision. And so I don't think there's really a wrong way or a right way to financial independence.
When it came to you not being aware of all like the tools you had at your disposal to help you reach financial independence, so, you know, 2-income household, a good income, what about like the other like expenses? What were there things that you did on the expense side of the equation that helped you? Like, did you have to cut things out, or was it really more of just like reorganizing your finances?
I always think we could be better, right? We could always be improving. I love reading self-help books because I always think as a person, you're always changing, you're evolving, and it's good to reevaluate what's working and not working. Sure, I could definitely reduce spending on eating out, for example. Like, one of the things for me is that if I want to go to a nice restaurant with my family, like, I'm not going to look at a budget. I'm not going to look at the prices and worry about that. Like, I'm going to go and enjoy the food, enjoy my time with my family. And so for me, it wasn't really changing anything drastically. When I learned about the financial independence movement, it felt drastic because I was like opening my mind to this future reality of maybe not working till 65. And that was huge for me. But at the same time, I didn't make drastic changes. I wasn't changing my spending as much. I think I could have. And I think I probably would have reached financial independence a lot sooner. But for me, it's balance. And that's what I value more. And that's something that I really appreciated after my cancer diagnosis, is that I'm so glad for me, I didn't go the extreme frugality route, right? Like, I could have eaten at home every single day, been miserable, like doing dishes is the worst. Like, I love cooking, but I just hate after the cooking. And so I made small tweaks to improve myself. And then after my cancer diagnosis, I learned a little bit more about things I could have done differently, like life insurance, for example. at my work, there was a certain amount that I could have increased my limit to without like a medical examination. And I found out after the fact that that guarantee only happens when you first join the company. So even though it was guaranteed a certain amount, if I go back now and I try to get that same amount, I still have to do a medical examination. So like something like that, I would not have known unless I went through the experience I went through. And yes, I could have done that differently. But at the same time, is it like a make or break mistake? No, like it would have been nice to have done that and had that additional security for my family. But I've made up for it in other ways, which is we save a lot and invest a lot. So if something huge happens, we're going to be okay. Because my husband and I, we're set for retirement. And everything we do right now is just to accelerate that date. And obviously, being a cancer survivor, I have no clue if I'm going to even reach 65. So I think about that when I make my financial decisions too, is that I have this potential expiration date. I don't know if I'll actually expire at that time or not. And I think that's the same with everyone. We all don't know when our time is going to be up. And so we live with that truth and we make decisions every day. We either just assume that we'll live till 65 and beyond, or we live our life a little differently and say, hey, I may not live to 65. So maybe I don't want to be frugal. Maybe I want to spend a little bit more. And I think you just need to be careful is that if you are too optimistic or too pessimistic, you might end up not being happy with the results, the actual reality of your life, right? Because if you are too scared and you save too much and don't live your life, I think you'll regret it. But if you are too optimistic that I can just, if I lose my job, I'll get another job again. I could keep working till I'm 65. You don't know what's going to happen to your health. One thing I always mention to my friends is after my cancer diagnosis, I found out that 40.5% of Americans will get cancer in their lifetime. That is a crazy amount. That means either you or someone you know will get cancer. And we all live our life thinking, oh, this will never happen to me. Like I'll never fall sick or get ill or get cancer. And so the more you learn, the more you kind of help educate your decisions and how you live your life.
Let's talk a little bit about when you found out you had cancer and then that process, because I think that would be very enlightening for people to hear.
Yeah. For me, I was 36 when I was diagnosed with colorectal cancer, and it was a complete shock because not only were the symptoms not to the level that I thought a potential cancer patient should have. A lot of my symptoms were, I had constipation, diarrhea. Once in a while, I had some bleeding in my stool, but a lot of these were kind of explained away by myself and my doctors because I was pregnant, like I mentioned, twice actually. And during those times, which is crazy, I most likely had the cancer growing inside me. So the bleeding was attributed to hemorrhoids, right? Because all women, usually get hemorrhoids when they're pregnant. And so it's like, oh, that's fine. That's normal. I even mentioned it to my doctors and they were like, yeah, that's fine. The diarrhea and constipation, I always thought I was lactose intolerant. And so I always attributed to eating cheeses and ice creams. And I definitely took like lactate pills and things like that because I love cheese and ice cream and I will not give that up. But eventually it got to a point where I was losing a lot of weight. I lost a significant amount of weight after my actually both my first and second child. It was close to 20, 30 pounds within a 6-week period. The second time, I thought it was normal because it had happened with my first child, but then I just kept losing it and my appetite went down. And so I finally went to go see a doctor and they were like, oh, it's fine. You're breastfeeding. So that's probably why you're losing all this weight. So surrounding the lead up to my diagnosis, like both myself and my doctors, we were minimizing the symptoms I think also the media does a horrible job of making it seem like you need to be deathly ill to be diagnosed with cancer. And so that's one of the things I wanted to share is that no, unfortunately, a lot of cancers, including colorectal cancer, you're going to have no symptoms until it's too late. And so when I found out, I was in shock. You know, when you become a parent, you want to protect your child and your children, and you want the best for them. And the last thing you think about is whether you'll even be alive to raise them, whether you'll be the cause of potentially trauma in their life. And so it was definitely a really emotional time for me and my family and my husband. But one thing I am so grateful for, and the reason why I reached out to you, is because being on this financial journey allowed me to not worry about the financial burden of having a sudden illness and being diagnosed with cancer. Because unfortunately, in America, I think over 90% of us have health insurance. And yet you see GoFundMes of individuals raising funds for medical expenses. And I just didn't understand that until I was diagnosed. And then I found out, oh, people aren't saving for worst case scenario, right? They're not saving for potentially spending the full out-of-pocket maximum. And for those that do save the full out-of-pocket maximum, like myself, I didn't expect that I would have a surprise bill from an out-of-network provider that would be beyond my out-of-pocket maximum. Unfortunately, I was responsible and had extra money, but I'm going through this right now where I went to go see my oncologist. She had me go do a blood work within the same building. The blood work was sent to a lab. I finally get a bill. This was back in December or November when this happened. I got a bill like earlier this year after the fact. It was for almost $8,000. And I was like, what's going on? I reached my out-of-pocket maximum last year because I was diagnosed last year, just the CTs and MRIs before I even started chemotherapy, reached my out-of-pocket maximum because that stuff is expensive. And so I was like, I really reached my out-of-pocket maximum. What's going on? And I find out the lab that they had sent my blood work to was not in network. And it's like, well, my oncologist is in network. The place I got my blood drawn is in network, but you send it somewhere out of network. And how would I have known beforehand, right? And so it's things like that. You get this unexpected bill. And so even if you are responsible, things don't go perfectly like what happened to me, unfortunately.
Well, with that, now I'm just curious, did you have to pay that? Was there a way to fight that, or that was a bill?
I'm actually in the midst of that. So this is to be continued for the end of the story on that. But I have reached out to the cancer center that I was getting treatment at. I've reached out to the lab company as well. So I'm working on a solution. Unfortunately, this is where having too much of an income isn't helpful, right? Because there are different financial assistance and things like that that are available to certain individuals at a certain income level. But yeah, for me, I need to work through it and figure it out. There's also a No Surprise Bill Act that's been passed and it's supposed to help more in emergency situations. And so this is one of the situations where it just kind of wasn't covered by that.
Hey, Journeyers, if you are loving this podcast, then you will love my book, Your Journey to Financial Freedom, a step-by-step guide to achieving wealth and happiness. I wrote this book for you. This book is for you if you want a clear and enjoyable path to having more money, options, and a rich life. This book is for you if you hate your commute and the fact that you need to seek approval or permission from a boss. I hated that when I worked. This book is for you if you weren't born into wealth, you didn't marry rich or win the lottery, but you still want freedom. This book is for you if you're at a crossroads, a major decision or event is imminent. Maybe a career change, marriage, starting a family. Pressures are reaching a tipping point, and the discomfort and the desire for more can no longer be ignored. And this book is for you if you find yourself zoned out at meetings, looking out the window, or daydreaming about the life you truly want. So go pick up your journey to financialfreedom.com so I can show you how to map out how to get from where you are today to where you ultimately want to be and enjoy the journey while you're on the path. Head over to yourjourneytofinancialfreedom.com to see where you can pick the book up. It's available on Amazon, bookshop.org, Barnes & Noble, your local bookstore, everywhere. Go to yourjourneytofinancialfreedom.com to get the book now. You said you were diagnosed last year?
Yes.
And what about work? In terms of your job, or, are you still working? Did it give you allowance for having time off? What was that process like? Because I know for a lot of people, even if you are investing or saving some money, it's that loss of income that really takes a toll on your finances.
Yeah, I was really lucky to have had employers that were very accommodating. So I ended up actually working throughout my treatment. So I went through about 4 months of chemotherapy, and then I did chemo radiation. I had surgery in November to remove my tumor, and then I had something called an ileostomy, so it was temporary, and then I had that reversed, so another procedure recently. And except for the surgeries, I actually worked through everything because I just wasn't sure how I was going to react to the treatment. Because I think most people assume when you have chemotherapy, you're going to lose all your hair, you're going to be frail and sick. And fortunately, there's been a lot of advancement in medicine where there's ways to prevent or mitigate symptoms through medicine, through hydration, through eating. For example, I lost a lot of weight when I was going through treatment because I just had no appetite, and that was one of the side effects. And so I just combated that by eating as frequently as I could, even though I didn't feel like it. And as a big foodie, that was really, really sad for me because I love food, and the fact that I couldn't eat anything that I enjoyed because I just mentally couldn't, but I just forced myself to. And I think most people are shocked when they hear that I worked through all of this because they're like, don't you want to take time for yourself and things like that? And I actually really love what I do. And I think if I was with an employer that I just did not like, or I was in a career that I was not happy with, I think I would have taken the time off and I would have been able to. Washington State also has a paid leave for medical and family related expenses. And so I could have taken the leave, but I personally chose not to because I thought, one, I don't know how I'm going to react to the treatment. And two, what am I going to do with my time? Like, I want to keep myself busy because I don't want cancer to be taking something else away from me, right? And so I actually kept working. I was able to. I was sick here and there, but I just worked with my doctors to help with the symptoms. And you're not sick every single day either. It's kind of a cycle where you go in and then you just start not feeling well for a few days, and then you feel good again, and then the whole process starts all over again. And in addition to working, I didn't compromise like what I did outside of work either. Like, my son started T-ball for the first time, and I ended up being his coach. And some of his games and practices, I had my chemo pump connected to my port and in a fanny pack, and I was like running around on the field, and no one knew that I was like in the middle of getting chemo and coaching all these like 4 and 5-year-olds on the field.
There's a couple of things you said there that, you enjoyed your job. So some people listening to this would be like, in their current situation and in their world, they would be like, I would be out, especially if I could financially withstand loss of income or just a break. I'm going to go live my life, because you're faced now with this reality of your mortality, right? Like, here's something that's seemingly or external affecting what my life may look like. And it just goes to show you that it's going to be it's different for everyone. We don't know what that's going to look like. Everyone's journey is different. But I think it's inspiring to hear that in your situation, you were able to, you found power, right? Like you kind of took your power back, it seems like, from cancer to like live life and to continue on your own terms. And the other thing you said that I think is very interesting is that just like the fact that so many of us will be impacted by cancer. I know years before, like decades earlier, when I heard about cancer, it was like a family of a family friend or someone else. And now, like, I know a lot of people personally, like first cousins and aunts and people really close to me that have either passed away or currently have it. And so I know you've probably done a lot of research. You're on the board. I think I read in your bio for cancer. What are some of the things, especially for women? Because usually the colon cancer I've heard about is usually men. So like anything to help us in terms of our own health, be proactive to hopefully catch things like this earlier.
First of all, I want to say I'm sorry that you know people who have been affected or passed away from cancer. And unfortunately, it's the reality for a lot of us. What I learned from this journey is that it's a lot like financial independence. You don't want to go extreme, right? You don't want to be too healthy or too junk foody. You need to find a balance because that will let you be consistent, because you can eat healthy maybe once or twice, but if you don't enjoy it and you don't make fundamental changes in your life, you're not going to sustain that. And that's the same thing with your money, is that you need to find what works best for you and that you'll continue to do to work toward your goal. And so I always say it's really about balance in order to have the best life possible, because if you only do it once or twice, it's not going to be helpful. Obviously, yes, you should eat healthy. You should eat, your fruits and vegetables and try to eat less meat and things like that. But I think the biggest lesson I learned is you need to be able to sustain that. And so even if it's making one healthy meal, right, a day, or reducing one meat dish with legumes or, vegetables, things like that, I think is helpful. Also, at the end of the day, you could be the healthiest person. You could be a marathon runner. You could have been eating green kale smoothies every single day of your life with no sugar, nothing, and still get cancer, because cancer doesn't discriminate. No doctor can say with 100% certainty that if you do all of these things right, you will not get cancer. I have met some people who are angry because they're like, I did everything right and I still got cancer, right? Because most people think you have to be living this horrible lifestyle and then you get suddenly ill. Unfortunately, you can't control these things, what your body does. Some people are more susceptible to certain illnesses and maybe they don't realize that. Like, after I got my diagnosis, I found out all the females in my dad's side of the family have all now had cancer. I was the last one to get cancer. I knew about one of my cousins who had cancer. She had breast cancer, but I didn't know about my other cousin. My grandparents also on my dad's side had cancer. So all of us had different types of cancers. And so medically, my doctor would not have recommended anything differently except for, one or two of the cancer that occurred. They could have been like, oh, more screening earlier. And that's one of the things I highly recommend for all of us to live a healthy lifestyle, is to get those preventative screenings. There are certain ages that is recommended to get screening. Colorectal cancer, because it's rising in those under 50, they actually recently lowered the preventive screening age to 45. And so if you're 45 and older, please don't walk, run and go get your colonoscopy, because that is the gold standard to know if you have something going on with you. Also, if you don't know your family history, ask your parents, ask your cousins, because we don't know what we don't know. And one of the things I learned as well is that my dad had a lot of polyps when he had his colonoscopies. So all polyps don't always turn into cancer, but all colorectal cancer starts from a polyp. And so if you have a family that has like a history of polyps, it's a really good idea to just be a little high alert if you have any gastrointestinal symptoms. So like I mentioned, maybe constipation, diarrhea, loss of appetite, things like that. If you have any of those and you have a family member who goes to a gastroenterologist frequently to get a colonoscopy, you may want to be a little bit more cautious and maybe even go see a doctor and ask for one, even if you're not 45. That's the other thing, is that I would have been too young for the preventive screening and I wouldn't have been able to really prevent this. But for me advocating for myself, because when I knew that something wasn't right, I pushed for answers. I didn't think it was going to lead me to cancer. I thought I was going to have maybe an IBS or IBD diagnosis. That's what I was expecting, and that's why I pushed for a colonoscopy. But I say we all have gut instincts, and sometimes we dismiss it or let others dismiss it. And so being confident in yourself, because unfortunately, in our country, a lot of people hesitate to go see a doctor because of the cost. Like I mentioned, a lot of people don't have symptoms of cancer. And so they'll say, oh, I feel fine. I don't need to go to my annual exam. I don't need to do this because I'm healthy. I do all this. And unfortunately, you don't know what's going inside in your body unless you do those tests and scans and preventative screenings.
Yeah. And, all of what we're doing when it comes to our finances and wanting to retire early or have the freedom and flexibility that we want, it's not going to matter much if we're not here to enjoy that. Now, of course, if we leave legacy behind and a foundation for, our family and kids, that's one thing, and that's amazing. But for me, I love going to the gym, or I like the results of the gym. And I run, but I like the results of running. So externally, I take care of myself in terms of gym and physical activity. But I knew that this year I was like, committed to making sure I have that annual checkup, and that even now I'm like, okay, let me just, maybe it's something, I should get. I didn't think about getting a colonoscopy earlier than I needed to, but maybe that's something that I can look into, or like telling my husband again, hey, did you make that appointment? So I think taking into account as much as we care about like the physical things and the material things that we are searching for, is that we have to take care of us from the inside out. And that's not always easy. I get it. I get that we are working, we have kids, you get busy, and, you're just like, I'll put it off. I'll do it another time. But I hope this conversation prompts you to take your health, if you can, especially if you have the privilege of having insurance. I know not everyone does. And this society, especially the US, has a lot of reform that needs to be done so that people do have access and equal access and quality care. But if you do have the privilege of having insurance, like, take advantage of it to check yourself out and, advocate for yourself.
Yeah, even if you don't have insurance, there's charity care. There's a lot of nonprofits out there to support people financially or provide some type of assistance. And so if you have any symptoms or any cause of concerns, it's easier said than done to say, go get your screenings and be a little bit more cautious and get things checked out, especially when you're having financial problems or debt. But tomorrow's not promised, and I wouldn't want anyone to have delayed treatment because they couldn't afford it. And that's what frustrates me about our medical care system in this country, is that there are so many people out there who are foregoing treatment and screenings because they just can't afford it.
Since you've now been in this world and researched more, is there anything from like a ground level? I know you mentioned a charity just now. Are there any other resources you can share for people or who want more information, and anything else we can do from our perspectives?
Yeah, well, you can start with colonstars.org. I'm on the board and there's a lot of resources there. There are a lot of different cancer organizations and nonprofits. The American Cancer Society is one. There's a lot of statistics about the most common cancers. Unfortunately, there's an increase in early onset cancers in those that are under 50. So breast cancer, prostate cancer, colorectal cancer. It is the leading cause of cancer death in men right now, and it's the second for women. And so it is not only one of the top 3 most common cancers, not just in America, but globally, but it is the deadliest because I think the stigma around it, no one likes to talk about their poop and things like that. When you're a parent and you have young children, you're obsessed about poop, right? You're always talking to your co-parent about poop. You're talking to the doctor about poop. It's like, why does it look like this? All of that. And at some point, for some reason, we don't talk about our poop. And our poop gives a really big clue to how we're doing health-wise.
And the other thing you had mentioned before you pressed record, which I thought was I think it's important to just say again, like you mentioned Chadwick Boseman, and like when he was diagnosed and he passed away of it, if you want to share kind of like your perspective when you heard that and how like that was different for you.
Yeah. When Chadwick Boseman passed away from colon cancer, I was going through some of my symptoms. I was having some constipation, some bleeding in the stool, and I remember hearing about a free stool test that you could receive. And I was like, I'm hearing that more Black Americans are getting this cancer, not Asian Americans or even women. And so I was like, I'm not going to take advantage of this because I want someone who really needs it to utilize this benefit. And I didn't see anyone that looked like me with colorectal cancer, especially that's, Asian American, I'm Korean, and even a young mom. Like I thought that this was more of a man thing. You see the memes and stuff online about dad spending too much time in the bathroom, right? Now I hear about that. I'm like, maybe he has colorectal cancer, or maybe he has IBS, IBD. We shouldn't be joking about this. But I think that's one of the reasons why I reached out to you, because no better time than now to reach out to you so that your listeners can know that this can happen to you, even if you live a really healthy lifestyle. Like I felt like I lived a pretty healthy lifestyle. Yes, I could have, not gone to McDonald's as much, but overall, I eat a variety of food. Like I have a really good diet. Like I get the probiotics and prebiotics and through the foods that I eat, and I exercise. Like I didn't just sit in front of the TV day in and day out just eating junk food. And so I think that's most of us, right? I think most of us do a pretty good job of balance, and you would never expect getting suddenly ill or getting cancer. And so, yeah, when I heard about the statistic of 40.5% of us will get cancer, I was like, why are people not talking about this more? And I think if you knew that you could potentially have this illness, I think you would lead your life a little differently. Maybe you would, maybe not stress too much about certain things, or maybe be more proactive about certain aspects of your life and get your things together in order. I don't know, right? Everyone has different things they could work on, but I think we would all lead our lives a little differently if we just had some more awareness about the possibility of something huge like this happening in your life at your prime, right? I thought maybe when I was old and gray, maybe I'll get some kind of illness, like break my hip or something. I did not think I'd be going to the hospital for a 12-month period and beyond, because now I have to go and get blood work and scans for surveillance. Before all this, the only big major health thing I had was removing my tonsils. And that was years ago.
Well, now that you were faced with this, I think also just talking about some tangential things still important that people can do is like really life insurance. And I know some people, hesitate to do it, and maybe they don't think they have enough assets, but just putting that in place is very important, especially if you have a family, even if you don't, to help figure out like, what happens to your assets, or, protecting or helping loved ones work through like the financial cost of what happens. And then, I always say like the will and your estate plan, getting that together so people can understand and there's a plan in place that happens if something does happen to you.
Yeah, even though I'm a lawyer and I should know all this, I did not have a will or anything set up. I still don't actually. That's something in the process because there's so much that you have to think through, right? It's like if you pass away and your co-parent passes away, who watches your children? It's such a big decision. And so I feel like sometimes you get this like paralysis on taking the step because there's so many big questions that you have to ask yourself. And so it's almost a barrier. It's like, even though you want to do the right things, you're like either scared to, or you're just like, I don't have the answers. And I would encourage you, don't do what I did and just wait till you get a sudden illness or cancer to do something about it. Definitely reach out to help. There's so many great resources and lawyers and advisors out there that can help you work through those big questions. The other thing is, I actually did the math on life insurance, like term life insurance. And I was like, okay, if I invested this much that I'm paying toward life insurance and I died like, X amount of years, how much would I have had if I had invested instead of getting this term life insurance? And usually you're not going to have that much money saved up from investing that. Even though you think, oh, it's not worth it. It's like until you're actually financially independent, you're just hedging your bets, right? You're just making sure like until I reach to this financial security, I'll have this in place. And that's what we've done after the fact, unfortunately. So I'm not able to get life insurance now because if I went through a medical exam, I would be rejected because now I'm a cancer survivor. So unfortunately, they don't have to give me life insurance. But my husband is perfectly healthy. Nothing's happened to him. So we went and did that immediately after my diagnosis because that was one of the big things that I was like, oh my gosh, like I should have done this like way before this happened. I should know better. And it's just one of the things that you just don't get around to because you assume that you're going to live till at least 65 and work forever and be healthy, right? No one assumes the worst. And that's coming from me when I feel like a lot of people think I'm pessimistic. I think I'm an optimistic realist, but no one's perfect. And that's why I want to share my story is that even if you have all the information and logically these are things that I should be doing, you don't always do it for whatever reason, and don't beat yourself over it. Like just do the best that you can moving forward. And that's what I've done is that, okay, there's these things, there's these priorities. Some are more of a priority than others. And it's just slowly getting through your list of things to do and hoping for the best.
Yeah, don't let shame and what you should have did like continue to keep you stuck or not making improvements. Like we all have that. There is a long list of things that I can do right now that can save me some money, that can cancel some stuff. There's a long list. And I think we just need to take into account that we are human. I am human. I think about sometimes like I have I call it my emotional, like mental load of my kids, which I love and enjoy them. But yes, it's important to maybe make these calls and do these things to help save this money. But I emotionally and mentally don't have the capacity. Something that I can do, but it's not something that I'm able to do right now. And so if I let that kind of what I should be doing or the shame of knowing better but not doing better prevent me from doing other things in my life, then, it creates this just cloud of shame that gives you negative self-talk and just doesn't allow you to then come out of things. And just so give yourself grace. You don't have to get it all perfectly right, but hopefully this conversation will inspire you to start looking into things, start clicking those hyperlinks, as I say, or picking up the breadcrumbs to figure out what your life looks like and how to protect yourself. Now that you've experienced this, you're still experiencing it. What has changed about your financial independence goals and wants? So sometimes, when I first started my journey, it was about speed and how quickly I can get to my financial independence number. And then life happens. And I'm like, okay, maybe I'll just take the more balanced, slower approach so that I can enjoy life. For you, going through your experiences now, have you changed your perspective on how you want to reach financial independence? Are you slowing down? Do you feel like you need to accelerate it more? What does that look like for you and your family?
Definitely, I'm trying to live in the present more and enjoy the day to day. I think going to what you mentioned about beating yourself over like small mistakes you've made, 2, 3, 10 years from now, that mistake, is it really going to be that big of a mistake? Most of the time, probably not, right? And so just realizing that right now, something might seem like a really big deal, but it may not be in the grand scheme of things. And so just realizing like what's important to you, having that self-awareness. And that's something I'm still always working on right now. Before my cancer diagnosis, I was like, I want to put as much money away and invest it as possible. I want to be retired like yesterday, right? And I want to do it faster. But at the same time, it's like, I don't want to sacrifice my time with my children, with my family and friends. One of the debates, I have a lot of debates with my husband, is about, is it worth the extra income to get to a different job elsewhere when there's this risk of not knowing what the culture is like, if it's going to be high stress, if it's, if you're even going to like the work. And so, yeah, everything's a give and take, right? If you give up something, you're taking on something else. And so at this point in my life, I would say I'm a big proponent of the slow coast fire movement because I feel like it's a happy medium, at least for me, because I've reached coast fi. If I don't work and if I don't invest anymore, I'm going to have more than enough at 65. The reality is for me, unfortunately, the survival rate for colorectal cancer is not very great for stage 4. So 5 years from now is basically the timeline I have for myself, is that 5 years from now, if I do this, am I going to regret it? And so that's kind of unfortunately how I'm living my life, because like I said, I'm an optimistic realist. And so I look at the reality of the statistics, but I'm optimistic that things will work out. But just in case, will I do this way or that way? And that's a question I'm always asking myself. And I think it's always evolving. And like I said earlier, it's just, you got to do what's best for you under your circumstances. Like my life is very different from your life and your listeners' lives. And so there's so many different components that contribute to the decisions we make. And so I think, like you said, give yourself grace to sometimes make mistakes. Most of the time, it's not going to be life-altering mistakes, and there's solutions to address it, right? You can fix it, right? Like I said, I can't get life insurance, but my husband was able to. And so we addressed it. Give yourself grace, enjoy your life, because you never know. You might think it won't happen to you, but you just never know. And so if something does happen, I hope you don't regret the way you lived your life.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much, Esther, for coming on and sharing your story. I really hope it helps fellow journeyers who are on their path to just a life that they can live and enjoy, not just for the future of this financial independence dream that we want to have more options, but like today, I think, the life that we want, like we want to live it now, not putting our joy on hold, even if we may not be in the financial spot that we want. How do we have joy today, no matter how much is in our bank account, even if we are in debt, or when things do feel financially bleak? Like, how can you create a life that you love, hopefully surrounded by people who love you and in an environment where you feel safe? So I just want to thank you again for coming on the show. I don't know if you have a public persona or what your plans are, but if you want to share anything, or people can reach out, or you're just a page, that you can, and we can link it in the show notes. But if not, that's totally fine too.
Yeah, right now I'm on Instagram and TikTok as Parenting with Cancer. I started initially to keep my friends and family in the loop about my cancer journey, but now I just want to spread awareness about colorectal cancer and early onset cancer. So if you want to reach out and connect with me, I am there. Maybe I'll get a website up one day. We'll see. And thank you so much for having me. This is such an amazing experience to talk with you after listening to you all these years. So thank you very much. Oh, I also wanted to share one story. I forgot to mention this. The reason why I reached out to you is that I was actually at the hospital after I got my tumor removed, and I was talking to one of my night nurses, and somehow it came to talking about how she was investing in real estate and how she was an immigrant. And we started talking about investing because I am such a nerd about this. Like my husband, not so much. And so when I meet someone in real life, I can talk about like index funds and all this stuff. I will completely take advantage. So I was talking to my night nurse about investing, and I was telling her about how what I shared with you, which is I thought investing was like gambling. And she was like, yeah, me too. Like, I don't know like what stocks to pick or anything. So I haven't invested really in anything. And my brother told me to, invest in like real estate and all of this because, you get the income from renting it out. But yeah, I shared to her like my experience, and I was like, yeah, like I didn't know anything about this either. Like I was pretty much in my late 20s, early 30s when I started investing. I feel so late to the game, but I'm sure there's other people in that are late in life and they feel the same way. But yeah, I taught her about index funds. I actually was like, you need to listen to Journey to Launch. And then I was like, I want to thank you. Like I went through this like traumatic experience. I'm still going through it. I don't know how long I have left to live. And I want to thank people who have helped me and shaped me to be the person I am. And even though like I've never talked to you or met you before today, I feel like I know you. I know it seems a little cliche. I feel like a lot of people say that when they meet celebrities and things like that. But yeah, I was like, you know what? Like, I don't really do this, but I reached out to you because I was like, I have to tell her what an impact you had in my life. And I'm sure there's so many listeners who are in the same situation me where they were like, I have no clue what I'm doing. And then they came across your podcast or learned about the FIRE movement, and now they're better off than they were before. And my life's not perfect. My finances could be better, right? I wish I was financially independent right now. Like if I could just not invest and just splurge all the time, that would be great. But oh my God, like I can only imagine the medical debt and financial strain I would have been in if I wasn't doing all this. Because now I have this extra cushion, right? If I do have this unexpected, out of network bill, I can just, maybe contribute less to my 401k or not contribute to my children's college fund, things like that. And I can make adjustments. I have this safety net that I probably wouldn't have had if I didn't come across your podcast and just all this information that you share with everyone. So I really, really hope that you understand how thankful I am for what you do, especially since you don't really get to talk with your listeners day to day and see what an impact you do. And so that's what prompted me to message you. And I totally didn't expect to be on your podcast at all. This is such a surreal, like I said, such a full circle moment for me because, yeah, I wasn't really investing or doing anything big when I started. And then you literally changed my financial health and trajectory, right? I just can't imagine where I would be right now if I was going through cancer and worrying about can I pay all these medical bills and things like that. And it makes me so sad knowing that there's so many people that are going through that stress of not only dealing with cancer, but worrying about like, am I going to be able to stay in my home or pay for groceries? Like that is the last thing someone fighting for their life should be worrying about. But yeah, I really truly want to say thank you. I can only imagine like what my life would have been like right now without what you've taught me and all your listeners. So I don't know if I shared, but the survival rate for stage 4 cancer, the rate is, I think, 14%. So 14% of people who get stage 4 cancer are alive in 5 years of their diagnosis. So it's like when you get a wake-up call like that about your mortality, you also like have this urgency to like do what's important for you like now. Why put it off like a day or two when you can do it right now?
Wow. Well, I just want to thank you. So I take all that in, I accept it, and it fuels me to, keep going. And, that's really when I think about the podcast and now the book is that I hope that it's an entry point and catalyst for people to change their lives, because that's what happened to me. Like I wouldn't be able to sit and talk to you if I didn't one day stumble upon the FIRE movement and get immersed in the podcast and the books and into this world. And so I know how different someone's life can be if they make changes. And it's not like just about like finances. Like I'm not driven by like the finances. Like doing a budget doesn't like excite me. I'm not one of those personal finance people. It's a tool so that I can live the life that I really want to live. And so I hope that this will help other people to discover what that looks like and be their entry point. So send this, if you're listening, send this episode, the book, Your Journey to Financial Freedom, to someone. If it's changing your life, hopefully you can help change someone else's life. Esther, thank you so much again for chatting. It's so enlightening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Don't forget, you can get the episode show notes for this episode by going to journeytolaunch.com or click the description of wherever you're listening to this. And you can still grab your Jumpstart Guide for free to help you on your journey to financial freedom by going to journeytolaunch.com/jumpstart. If you want to support me and the podcast and love the free content and information that you get here are 4 ways that you can support me and the show. 1, make sure you're subscribed to the podcast wherever you listen, whether that's Apple Podcasts, that purple app on your phone, your Android device, YouTube, Spotify, wherever it is that you happen to listen, just subscribe so you are not missing an episode. And if you're happening to listen to this in Apple Podcasts, rate, review, and subscribe there. I appreciate and read every single review. Number 2, follow me on my social media accounts. I'm at Journey to Launch on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and I love, love, love interacting with journeyers there. 3, support and check out the sponsors of this show if you hear something that interests you. Sponsors are the main ways we keep the podcast lights on here, so show them some love for supporting your girl. 4, and last but not least, share this episode, this podcast with a friend or family member or coworker so that we can spread the message of Journey to Launch. All right, that's it. Until next week, keep on journeying, journeyers.